What happens when a mother's love turns into a weapon, not behind closed doors but in the unforgiving glare of a courtroom? The air is heavy, the silence unbearable, and yet beneath it all there's a tremor, an almost imperceptible tension in the mother's voice, a tightening of her jaw, a glance that feels less like concern and more like accusation. Then, a document slides across the polished table, its edges sharp as a blade, and the daughter's eyes widen as if the paper itself carries betrayal. A murmur ripples through the crowd, a whisper too faint to catch but heavy enough to make the daughter's shoulders stiffen. Every tick of the clock feels like a countdown, every shuffle of papers like a drumbeat leading to an explosion. What would you do if you saw your own parents' lips part, ready to unleash words that could stain your name forever? The judge watches, leaning slightly forward, sensing the storm before it breaks. The daughter sits frozen, her fear palpable, her silence trembling under the weight of what's about to be spoken. What could possibly drive a mother to strip her child of dignity in front of strangers? Think about your own family, moments where words spoken in anger left scars that never healed, words you wished had been swallowed instead of shouted. The fear of public humiliation is universal, and the curiosity of what comes next keeps us leaning forward, desperate to know whether this daughter will crumble or rise. What if the judge, the one person with authority to silence the chaos, chooses instead to amplify it? The tension tightens as secrets hover just beneath the surface, waiting to erupt. The courtroom is not just a place of justice, it is a crucible where relationships are tested, where pride collides with vulnerability, and where the line between love and betrayal blurs until no one can tell which side they stand on. What happens when those resentments are no longer private whispers but public declarations? So here we are, at the edge of revelation. The mother's lips tremble, her voice rises, and though the sentence has not yet been spoken, the daughter already feels its weight pressing down. The judge leans forward, ready to intervene. If you were in that room, watching your own family unravel, would you side with blood or with truth? The courtroom does not breathe, it holds its silence like a secret, pressing down on everyone inside. Family bonds, so often spoken of as unbreakable, suddenly feel fragile, brittle enough to snap under the weight of a single accusation. The daughter sits rigid, her hands clasped tightly together, as if holding herself from falling apart. The mother's gaze is fixed, sharp, and unyielding, and though no words have yet been spoken, the daughter feels each second as a wound waiting to open. A paper rests on the table, its presence louder than any voice, and the crowd leans forward, sensing that it carries more than ink, it carries history, resentment, and perhaps shame. Then, as the daughter's eyes flicker across the page, a single phrase leaps out, unfit to represent this family. Her breath catches, her lips tremble, and the audience shifts, sensing that the paper itself is a weapon. Have you ever felt the sting of betrayal before the words were even spoken aloud? The judge watches, eyes narrowing slightly, as if already aware that this is not merely a matter of law but of family unraveling in public view. His fingers tap once against the desk, a subtle gesture that suggests he has seen this kind of fracture before, perhaps too many times. The daughter's shoulders tremble, her breath shallow, and the mother's jaw tightens again, a signal that the storm is gathering. A whisper passes through the benches, a single word caught, disgrace, and though it is not yet shouted, it lands like a stone in the daughter's chest. The atmosphere is not just heavy, it is charged, like lightning waiting to strike. What happens when the people closest to you become the ones who strip away your dignity? The silence stretches, but it is not empty, it is filled with glances, with the sound of shifting feet, with the tension of a crowd that knows they are about to witness something raw. The daughter's eyes flicker toward the paper again, her lips parting slightly as if she wants to speak, but no words come. She knows that whatever is written there, whatever is whispered in the air, will soon be spoken aloud, and once it is, there will be no return. The mother's hand hovers near the document, her fingers twitching, her body leaning forward as though preparing to strike with words instead of weapons. Have you ever seen betrayal take shape not in action but in anticipation, in the unbearable wait for the moment it finally breaks free? The judge clears his throat, a sound that cuts through the silence like a blade, and the daughter flinches, her body betraying her fear. The crowd shifts again, restless, sensing that the eruption is near. The mother's lips press together, her eyes narrowing, and the daughter's gaze drops to the floor, as if bracing herself for impact. The atmosphere is no longer just tense, it is suffocating, a pressure that makes even the strongest hearts falter. What if the words about to be spoken are not just accusations but truths too painful to deny? The daughter's hands tighten, her knuckles white, her breath uneven. The mother's chest rises sharply, her voice caught in the space between silence and explosion. The paper lies between them like a weapon waiting to be drawn, and the crowd leans forward, hungry for the moment when silence will finally shatter. The judge leans back slightly, his eyes fixed on the mother, as though daring her to speak. And in that moment, the daughter knows that whatever comes next will not just define her reputation, it will define her family, her legacy, her very place in the world. If you were sitting there, watching the tension coil tighter and tighter, would you pray for silence or brace yourself for the storm? The courtroom feels like a storm held in chains, every breath from the crowd a gust of wind waiting to break free. The daughter sits rigid, her eyes fixed on the paper that lies between her and her mother, its words already cutting her deeper than any spoken insult could. She has seen enough to know what is coming, phrases that brand her as unworthy, accusations that paint her as a shame to the family name. The mother's hand hovers closer, her fingers brushing the edge of the document, and the daughter's pulse quickens as though each touch is a countdown to humiliation. Then, for the briefest moment, the daughter's eyes lift, meeting her mother's with a flash of defiance, a silent plea that says, "Not here, not like this." It is gone in an instant, swallowed by fear, but the crowd catches it, a ripple of unease spreading through the benches. What happens when silence cracks, not with words, but with a look that dares to resist? The judge leans forward slightly, his gaze sharp, his expression unreadable, but there is a flicker, an almost imperceptible tightening of his brow, that suggests he has already glimpsed the truth written on that page. His fingers tap once against the desk, deliberate, as though signaling that he knows more than he lets on. The daughter's shoulders tremble, her breath shallow, but her lips part, whispering a single word, "No," so faint it barely exists, yet strong enough to make the mother's jaw tighten further. The crowd stirs, restless, sensing that the eruption will not be one-sided, that resistance, however fragile, has entered the room. What if the accused refuses to stay silent, even when silence seems safer? The atmosphere thickens, no longer just tense but suffocating. A cough from the back row echoes too loudly, a shuffle of feet feels like thunder, and the daughter's whispered denial lingers in the air like smoke. The mother's eyes burn with anger, her hand tightening on the paper, her body leaning forward, her breath sharp. The daughter's gaze drops again, but her fingers twitch against the table, as though ready to push back, to flee, or to fight. The judge watches, unmoving, his expression carved in stone, but his eyes betray a knowledge that unsettles the room. He knows what is written, he knows what is about to be said, and yet he waits, letting the tension coil tighter, letting the daughter's fear and defiance clash in silence. What happens when fear collides with the first spark of resistance? The paper lies between them, no longer just ink on a page but a weapon, a verdict, a declaration of disgrace. The daughter's hands tremble, her breath uneven, her silence louder than any protest could be, yet her whispered denial still hangs in the air, daring her mother to speak. The mother's chest rises sharply, her lips part, and the crowd leans forward, ready to witness the moment that will shatter the fragile illusion of family loyalty. The judge leans in, his eyes fixed, his presence commanding, and the daughter knows that whatever comes next will not just wound her, it will define her. If you were there, watching fear and defiance collide in the same breath, would you believe resistance could change the outcome, or would you brace yourself for the inevitable strike? The silence breaks like glass, sharp and sudden, as the mother's voice erupts into the courtroom, slicing through the air with words that cannot be unsaid. "She's a total disgrace." The sentence lands with the force of a hammer, reverberating against the walls, echoing in the ears of everyone present. The daughter flinches as though struck, her body recoiling, her breath stolen by the violence of the declaration. The crowd gasps, a ripple of shock spreading through the benches, some leaning forward, others pulling back, all caught in the gravity of the moment. The judge's eyes narrow, his posture stiffening, but he does not speak yet. He lets the words hang, heavy and damning, as though testing their weight. The daughter's lips tremble, her hands clutching the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her silence louder than any protest. What happens when the person who gave you life becomes the one who strips it of dignity in front of strangers? The mother's voice rises again, trembling not with weakness but with fury, each syllable sharpened by years of resentment. She has shamed this family, she has betrayed the blood that raised her, and she dares to sit here as if she belongs among us. The daughter's eyes widen, tears brimming but refusing to fall, her gaze darting toward the judge as if searching for refuge, for someone to stop the storm. The crowd murmurs, whispers colliding, some nodding in agreement, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The daughter's chest tightens, her breath uneven, her silence a prison she cannot escape. What if the words spoken against you are not just accusations but truths twisted into weapons? The judge leans forward slightly, his gaze fixed on the mother, his expression unreadable, but his eyes betray a flicker of disapproval. He knows the power of words, the damage they can inflict, and yet he waits, letting the eruption unfold, letting the daughter's vulnerability be laid bare. The daughter's lips part, a faint sound escaping, "Please," but it is swallowed by the mother's next declaration. She is unfit to represent us, unfit to carry our name, unfit to stand in this courtroom as anything but a disgrace. The daughter's shoulders collapse inward, her body folding under the weight of humiliation, her silence now a scream that no one hears. What happens when your identity itself is torn from you, when your name becomes a weapon wielded against you? The crowd shifts again, restless, unsettled, sensing that this is no ordinary trial but a spectacle of family betrayal. Some avert their eyes, unwilling to witness the cruelty, while others lean closer, drawn to the rawness of the moment. The daughter's gaze flickers upward, a flash of defiance breaking through the tears, her eyes meeting her mother's with a silent challenge, "You cannot erase me." It is fleeting, fragile, but it is there, a spark of resistance in the midst of collapse. The mother sees it, her jaw tightening, her voice rising louder, harsher, determined to crush even that flicker of strength. She has no honor, no respect, no place among us. The daughter's breath catches, her silence trembling, her heart pounding against the cage of her chest. What if the fight for dignity begins not with words but with the refusal to break? The judge's hand lifts slightly, a signal that the eruption has reached its peak, that the storm must be contained. His gaze sweeps the room, commanding silence, but the echoes of the mother's words linger, heavy and unrelenting. The daughter sits frozen, her body trembling, her mind racing, her silence both shield and prison. The crowd waits, breathless, knowing that the next word spoken will either shatter her completely or offer the faintest chance of redemption. If you were there, hearing a mother condemn her child as a disgrace, would you believe the words or question the motive behind them? The eruption of the mother's words still hangs in the air, heavy and unrelenting, when the judge finally moves. He leans forward, slow and deliberate, the weight of his presence shifting the atmosphere in the room. The crowd falls silent, their whispers cut short, as though the very act of his movement demands obedience. His hands rest firmly on the desk, his eyes fixed on the mother, but this time his gaze carries something colder than judgment. There is a flicker of disappointment, a restrained anger that simmers beneath the surface, and it makes the silence feel less like patience and more like condemnation. The daughter feels it too, her breath catching, her body trembling, her silence pierced by the possibility that someone might finally intervene. The judge does not speak immediately, he lets the silence stretch, lets the tension coil tighter, as though testing how much the room can bear before it breaks. What happens when authority chooses not just to wait, but to make its silence a weapon? The mother's chest rises sharply, her lips pressed together, her fury still simmering, but the judge's gaze holds her in place. It is not outrage, not fury, but something sharper, an unspoken reminder that her words have crossed a line, that her anger has become cruelty. The daughter's eyes flicker upward, meeting the judges for a fleeting moment, and in that glance she sees something she cannot name, pity, perhaps, or a recognition of her suffering. The crowd senses it too, leaning forward, their anticipation shifting from the mother's fury to the judge's silence. What if the next sentence spoken is not an accusation but a verdict that reshapes everything? The judge clears his throat, a sound that feels heavier than the mother's shouting, a sound that commands attention without raising its volume. His fingers tap once against the desk, deliberate, measured, as though marking the rhythm of what is about to unfold. The daughter's heart pounds, her breath uneven, her silence trembling, and the mother's jaw tightens, her defiance flickering under the weight of his gaze. The crowd waits, breathless, knowing that the moment has shifted, that the storm is no longer hers to command. What happens when fury is silenced by authority that carries both power and disappointment? The judge leans closer, his voice still withheld, his presence filling the room with a gravity that makes even the strongest hearts falter. The daughter's lips part, a faint sound escaping, but it is swallowed by the silence he maintains, a silence that feels deliberate, purposeful, designed to make every soul in the room lean forward in dread. The mother's eyes narrow, her body stiffening, but she does not speak again. She knows that whatever comes next will not be hers to control. The daughter's gaze drops, her shoulders curling inward, her silence now a shield against the unknown. What if the words about to be spoken are not just judgment but revelation, exposing truths no one expected? The judge's hand lifts slightly, a gesture that freezes the room, a signal that the eruption has reached its limit. His eyes sweep across the crowd, commanding silence, commanding stillness, commanding fear. Yet beneath that authority, there is something more, a quiet condemnation, a restrained anger that makes the silence heavier than any shouted verdict. The daughter sits frozen, her body trembling, her mind racing, her silence both shield and prison. The mother's breath catches, her fury momentarily stalled, her voice trapped in the space between defiance and submission. The crowd waits, breathless, knowing that the next words spoken will not just shatter the daughter, they will define the family, the trial, the legacy itself. If you were there, watching the judge lean forward with silence that felt like judgment itself, would you brace yourself for mercy or prepare for a sentence that cuts deeper than any accusation? The courtroom shifts again, the silence no longer just heavy but charged with something darker, truths waiting to be unearthed. The mother's fury has cracked the surface, but beneath it lies something deeper, something the daughter fears more than humiliation, exposure. The paper on the table is no longer just an accusation, it is a record, a ledger of secrets carried for years. The daughter's eyes flicker across the page, catching fragments, dates, names, debts, each one a reminder of wounds buried but never healed. Then her gaze freezes on a single line, a loan taken in another's name. Her breath stumbles, her chest tightens, and the crowd senses it too, leaning forward, hungry for revelation. What happens when the trial of law becomes the trial of family history? The judge's gaze sharpens, his silence heavier now, as though he already knows what the paper contains. His brow furrows, not in anger but in recognition, as if he has seen this pattern before, families tearing themselves apart not over crime but over secrets. The daughter's lips part, a faint whisper escaping, "That's not true," but her voice falters, drowned by the weight of the document. The mother seizes the moment, her hand pressing against the paper, her voice trembling with rage. She has hidden things from us, things that shame this family more than her presence here. The crowd gasps, whispers colliding, some leaning closer, others recoiling, all caught in the gravity of betrayal. What if the secrets you thought would stay buried are suddenly dragged into the light? The daughter's eyes widen, her silence cracking into fragments of panic. She remembers the choices she made in desperation, the forged signature that bought her time but stole her integrity, the mistakes she prayed would never surface. Her fingers twitch against the table, her body leaning forward as though ready to defend herself, but the words remain trapped in her throat. The judge watches, his eyes narrowing, his silence now tinged with disappointment, as though he sees not just a case but a family unraveling. The mother's voice rises again, sharper, harsher, each syllable cutting deeper. "She betrayed us, betrayed the blood that raised her, and now she hides behind silence. The daughter's breath catches, her heart pounding, her silence trembling. What happens when silence itself becomes proof of guilt? The crowd shifts, restless, unsettled, sensing that this is no longer just about dignity but about truth itself. Some avert their eyes, unwilling to witness the cruelty, while others lean closer, drawn to the rawness of the moment. The daughter's gaze flickers upward, a flash of defiance breaking through the fear, her eyes meeting the judge's with a silent plea, "See me, not just the paper." It is fleeting, fragile, but it is there, a spark of resistance in the midst of collapse. The judge's hand tightens on the desk, his silence deliberate, his presence commanding, but his eyes betray something more, pity, perhaps, or restrained anger, a recognition that the storm is not just fury but history. What if the verdict is not about the crime but about the secrets that define a family? The paper lies between them, no longer just ink but confession, no longer just accusation but revelation. The daughter's hands tremble, her breath uneven, her silence louder than any protest could be. The mother's chest rises sharply, her lips part, her voice ready to unleash another blow, but the judge leans forward, his gaze cutting through the room, freezing the moment. The crowd waits, breathless, knowing that the next words spoken will not just wound the daughter, they will expose the family itself. If you were there, watching secrets rise from the shadows, would you cling to silence or demand the truth, no matter the cost? The storm does not end with the mother's fury, it shifts, spreading like fire to the rest of the family. The daughter sits trembling, her silence heavy, when another voice rises from the benches, a sibling, sharp and unyielding, stepping forward to testify. "She forged my name," the brother declares, his words slicing through the air with the precision of a blade. The crowd gasps, the revelation striking harder than accusation alone, because it carries the weight of betrayal between blood. The daughter's head snaps upward, her eyes wide, her lips parting in disbelief, but no words come. Pride has entered the courtroom, not as dignity but as a weapon, wielded by those who should have stood beside her. What happens when siblings turn against each other, their voices sharpened by rivalry and resentment? The judge leans forward, his gaze shifting from the mother to the brother, his silence now colder, heavier, tinged with restrained anger. He knows the damage of pride, the way it corrodes loyalty, the way it transforms family into adversaries. The daughter's breath stumbles, her chest tightens, and she shakes her head faintly, whispering, "That's not true," but her denial is drowned by the brother's next words. "She dragged us all into her debts, she stained our name, and she expects us to carry her shame." The crowd murmurs, whispers colliding, some nodding, others recoiling, all caught in the spectacle of siblings weaponizing truth. What if the people who share your blood become the ones who sharpen the blade against you? The sister rises next, her voice trembling but resolute, her pride burning through fear. "She betrayed us all. She thought she could hide behind silence, but silence cannot erase what she's done." The daughter's eyes dart toward her, pleading, desperate, but the sister's gaze is unyielding, her words heavy with years of rivalry. The daughter's hands clutch the table, her knuckles white, her silence trembling, her heart pounding against the cage of her chest. The judge's eyes narrow, his silence now tinged with pity, as though he sees not just a trial but a family tearing itself apart. What happens when pride is no longer about dignity but about destruction, when siblings weaponize their voices to erase one of their own? The crowd shifts, restless, unsettled, sensing that this is no longer just about secrets but about survival. Some avert their eyes, unwilling to witness the cruelty, while others lean closer, drawn to the rawness of betrayal. The daughter's gaze flickers upward, a flash of defiance breaking through the fear, her eyes meeting her brother's with a silent challenge, "You know why I did it." It is fleeting, fragile, but it is there, a spark of resistance in the midst of collapse. The brother sees it, his jaw tightening, his voice rising louder, harsher, determined to crush even that flicker of strength. "She has no honor, no respect, no place among us." The sister echoes him, her voice trembling but firm, "She is not one of us anymore." The daughter's breath catches, her silence trembling, her heart pounding, her body folding under the weight of betrayal. What if the fight for dignity begins not with defense but with the refusal to be erased? The judge's hand lifts slightly, a gesture that freezes the room, a signal that the eruption has reached its peak. His gaze sweeps across the siblings, commanding silence, commanding stillness, commanding fear. Yet beneath his authority, there is something more, a quiet condemnation, a restrained anger that makes the silence heavier than any shouted verdict. The daughter sits frozen, her body trembling, her mind racing, her silence both shield and prison. The crowd waits, breathless, knowing that the next words spoken will not just wound her, they will define the family, the trial, the legacy itself. If you were there, watching siblings weaponize pride against their own blood, would you believe their words or question the motives that drove them? The courtroom, once roaring with accusation, falls into a silence that feels almost unnatural, as though the air itself has paused to listen. The daughter sits trembling, her body folded inward, her breath uneven, her silence heavy with shame. Yet beneath the weight of betrayal, something flickers, fear colliding with the faintest glimmer of hope. Her eyes lift, just for a moment, catching the gaze of someone in the crowd, a relative who does not speak but whose expression softens, offering a silent reminder that not all bonds have been severed. The mother's fury still lingers, her chest rising sharply, her jaw tight, but the daughter feels the smallest shift, a breath of possibility that the storm might not consume her entirely. What happens when despair collides with the faintest spark of hope? The judge leans back slightly, his silence deliberate, his presence commanding, but his eyes betray something more, a restrained anger at the cruelty he has witnessed, tempered by a flicker of pity for the daughter's collapse. His gaze sweeps the room, freezing the crowd in place, and for a moment, the tension eases, not because the storm has passed but because everyone knows the next words will matter more than any that came before. The daughter's lips part, a faint whisper escaping, "I didn't mean to," but it is swallowed by the silence, too fragile to stand against the weight of accusation. Still, it exists, a breath of humanity in a room drowning in judgment. What if even the smallest confession can shift the balance between condemnation and mercy? The crowd stirs, restless, unsettled, sensing that the trial has reached a turning point. Some avert their eyes, unwilling to witness the daughter's collapse, while others lean closer, drawn to the rawness of her vulnerability. The mother's gaze hardens, her pride refusing to yield, but the daughter's trembling hands clutch the table, her knuckles white, her silence trembling, her heart pounding against the cage of her chest. She feels the weight of fear pressing down, yet she also feels the faintest pull of hope, hope that the judge's silence is not indifference but deliberation, hope that his words might carry more than condemnation. What happens when fear becomes the shadow that makes hope visible? The judge's hand lifts slightly, a gesture that freezes the room, a signal that the eruption has reached its limit. His eyes sweep across the crowd, commanding silence, commanding stillness, commanding anticipation. The daughter sits frozen, her body trembling, her mind racing, her silence both shield and prison. The mother's breath catches, her fury momentarily stalled, her voice trapped in the space between defiance and submission. The crowd waits, breathless, knowing that the next words spoken will not just wound the daughter, they will define the family, the trial, the legacy itself. If you were there, watching fear and hope collide in the same breath, would you believe the spark of hope could survive, or would you brace yourself for the storm that follows? The silence has stretched to its breaking point, the air thick with accusation, betrayal, and pride, when the judge finally speaks. His voice is low, steady, but it carries the weight of authority sharpened by restrained anger. "Enough," he says, and the word alone freezes the room, cutting through the chaos like a blade. The mother's lips press together, her fury stalled, the siblings fall silent, and the daughter's breath catches, her body trembling under the sudden shift. The judge leans forward, his eyes sweeping across the family, his gaze colder than judgment, heavier than pity. "You have all spoken of disgrace, of betrayal, of shame," he continues, his tone deliberate, each syllable measured. "But none of you have spoken of the truth that binds you." The crowd leans forward, breathless, sensing that this is not just a verdict but something deeper, something that will define the legacy of this family. What happens when authority chooses not to condemn but to reveal? The daughter's eyes widen, her silence trembling, her heart pounding against the cage of her chest. She braces herself, expecting condemnation, expecting the words that will erase her dignity forever. But the judge's voice shifts, carrying not just authority but wisdom, a twist that no one expected. The disgrace is not hers alone, he declares, his gaze piercing the mother, the siblings, the crowd. It belongs to all who choose pride over compassion, secrecy over honesty, cruelty over love. The mother stiffens, her jaw tightening, her fury faltering under the weight of his words. The siblings exchange glances, their pride suddenly fragile, their accusations trembling in the silence. The daughter's breath stumbles, her eyes brimming with tears, her silence breaking into a faint whisper, "Please." What if the verdict is not about one person's guilt but about the family's collective failure? The judge's voice grows sharper, his tone now carrying restrained anger, disappointment, and pity all at once. You speak of betrayal, yet you betray each other with every word. You speak of honor, yet you strip it away with your accusations. You speak of family, yet you wield it as a weapon. The crowd murmurs, unsettled, drawn to the rawness of his words, sensing that this is no ordinary judgment but a lesson carved into the heart of the trial. The daughter's gaze flickers upward, meeting his eyes, and in that moment she sees something she cannot name, not mercy, not condemnation, but truth. What happens when the sentence is not punishment but revelation? The judge pauses, his silence deliberate, his presence commanding, his words hanging heavy in the air. Then he delivers the line that will echo long after the trial ends: "The greatest crime here is not her mistake, it is your refusal to forgive." The mother's breath catches, her fury collapsing into silence, her pride trembling under the weight of his verdict. The siblings shift, restless, their voices stalled, their accusations suddenly hollow. The daughter's chest tightens, her breath uneven, her silence trembling, her heart pounding with the shock of words that cut deeper than any punishment. The crowd gasps, some nodding, others recoiling, all caught in the gravity of wisdom that feels both merciful and condemning. What if forgiveness itself is the verdict, the sentence, the punishment, and the salvation? The judge leans back, his eyes sweeping the room, his silence now heavier than any shouted decree. The daughter sits frozen, her body trembling, her mind racing, her silence both shield and release. The mother's gaze falters, her pride collapsing, her fury stalled, her voice trapped in the space between defiance and surrender. The siblings avert their eyes, their pride fractured, their accusations silenced. The crowd waits, breathless, knowing that the words spoken will not just wound the daughter, they will define the family, the trial, the legacy itself. If you were there, hearing the judge declare forgiveness as the verdict, would you see it as mercy or as a sentence heavier than any punishment? The judge's words linger in the air, heavier than any verdict, reshaping the silence into something almost unbearable. The daughter sits trembling, her breath uneven, her silence fractured by the weight of what has been spoken. The mother's fury falters, her pride collapsing into stillness, while the siblings avert their eyes, their accusations suddenly hollow. The crowd leans forward, sensing that the trial has shifted from punishment to something deeper, something harder to endure. The judge's gaze sweeps across the room, colder than judgment yet warmer than pity, and his voice carries the weight of truth sharpened by compassion. Forgiveness, he says, deliberate, measured, is not mercy for the guilty, it is the only way to free the innocent from the chains of pride. The words strike harder than any sentence, cutting through the family's defenses, exposing wounds that punishment could never heal. What happens when the verdict is not condemnation but the demand to forgive? The daughter's eyes widen, her silence trembling, her heart pounding against the cage of her chest. She braces herself, expecting punishment, expecting exile, but the judge's words twist the moment into something more complex. Her mistakes are real, he continues, his tone steady, his presence commanding, but so is your cruelty. You have chosen to weaponize family, to turn love into shame, and that is the greater betrayal. The mother stiffens, her jaw tightening, her pride trembling under the weight of his words. The siblings shift, restless, their voices stalled, their accusations silenced. The crowd murmurs, unsettled, drawn to the rawness of his verdict, sensing that this is no ordinary trial but a reckoning carved into the heart of the family. What if forgiveness itself is the punishment, forcing those who wielded cruelty to confront their own pride? The judge pauses, his silence deliberate, his presence filling the room with gravity. His eyes narrow, his brow furrows, and his voice sharpens with restrained anger. You speak of disgrace, yet you disgrace yourselves with every word. You speak of betrayal, yet you betray each other with every accusation. You speak of honor, yet you strip it away by refusing to forgive. The daughter's breath stumbles, her eyes brimming with tears, her silence breaking into a faint whisper, "Please." It is fragile, trembling, but it carries the weight of desperation, the plea for release from a storm she cannot weather alone. What happens when forgiveness becomes the only path to survival? The mother's gaze falters, her fury collapsing, her pride trembling, her voice trapped in the space between defiance and surrender. The siblings avert their eyes, their rivalry fractured, their accusations silenced. The crowd waits, breathless, knowing that the words spoken will not just wound the daughter, they will define the family, the trial, the legacy itself. The judge leans back, his voice steady, his tone deliberate, his presence commanding. The verdict is this: you will forgive her, not because she is blameless, but because without forgiveness, you are all guilty. The words hang heavy, echoing through the room, cutting deeper than any punishment, demanding not compliance but transformation. What if the true sentence is not exile but reconciliation, not punishment but the unbearable weight of forgiveness? The daughter sits frozen, her body trembling, her mind racing, her silence both shield and release. The mother's breath catches, her pride collapsing, her fury stalled, her voice silenced. The siblings shift, restless, their rivalry broken, their accusations hollow. The crowd leans forward, sensing that the trial has ended not with condemnation but with revelation. The judge's words linger, heavier than any decree, demanding forgiveness as the only path forward. If you were there, hearing forgiveness declared as the verdict, would you see it as salvation or as a sentence heavier than any punishment? The judge's words linger like thunder after lightning, reverberating through the courtroom, leaving silence that feels heavier than any sentence. The daughter sits trembling, her breath uneven, her silence fractured by the demand for forgiveness. Her eyes brim with tears, but beneath the collapse there is a flicker, fragile hope that the storm has shifted, that the weight pressing down might finally ease. The mother's fury falters, her pride collapsing into stillness, her jaw tight but her voice trapped in the space between defiance and surrender. The siblings avert their eyes, their accusations suddenly hollow, their pride fractured by the judge's decree. The crowd leans forward, restless, divided, some nodding in agreement, others recoiling, unwilling to accept forgiveness as justice. What happens when mercy itself becomes the verdict, forcing everyone to confront their own cruelty? The daughter's hands clutch the table, her knuckles white, her silence trembling, her heart pounding against the cage of her chest. She whispers, barely audible, "Thank you," though she does not know if the words are meant for the judge, for herself, or for the fragile hope that has survived. The mother's gaze falters, her eyes narrowing, her pride trembling, her fury stalled, her voice silenced. The siblings shift, restless, their rivalry broken, their accusations hollow, their silence now heavier than their words. The crowd murmurs, unsettled, sensing that the trial has ended not with punishment but with revelation. What if forgiveness is not salvation but a sentence heavier than exile, demanding transformation instead of escape? The judge leans back, his presence commanding, his silence deliberate, his words echoing through the room. His gaze sweeps across the family, colder than judgment yet warmer than pity, demanding not compliance but change. The daughter's breath stumbles, her eyes brimming with tears, her silence breaking into a faint whisper, "I didn't mean to." It is fragile, trembling, but it carries the weight of desperation, the plea for release from a storm she cannot weather alone. The mother's chest rises sharply, her lips parting, but no words come. Her pride has been fractured, her fury silenced, her voice trapped in the space between defiance and surrender. The siblings avert their eyes, their rivalry broken, their accusations hollow, their silence now louder than any testimony. What happens when silence itself becomes the first step toward forgiveness? The crowd shifts again, divided, unsettled, sensing that the trial has ended but the story has not. Some avert their eyes, unwilling to witness the cruelty of reconciliation, while others lean closer, drawn to the rawness of transformation. The daughter's gaze flickers upward, a flash of defiance breaking through the fear, her eyes meeting the judge's with a silent plea, "See me, not just my mistakes." It is fleeting, fragile, but it is there, a spark of resistance in the midst of collapse. The judge's hand tightens on the desk, his silence deliberate, his presence commanding, but his eyes betray something more, pity, perhaps, or restrained anger, a recognition that the storm is not just fury but history. What if the verdict is not about guilt but about the unbearable demand to forgive? The paper lies between them, no longer just ink but confession, no longer just accusation but revelation. The daughter's hands tremble, her breath uneven, her silence both shield and release. The mother's breath catches, her pride collapsing, her fury stalled, her voice silenced. The siblings shift, restless, their rivalry broken, their accusations hollow. The crowd waits, breathless, knowing that the trial has ended not with condemnation but with revelation. The judge's words linger, heavier than any decree, demanding forgiveness as the only path forward. If you were there, watching the aftermath unfold, would you see forgiveness as salvation or as a burden too heavy to bear? The daughter's voice trembles as it breaks the silence, fragile yet unyielding, carrying the weight of truth that can no longer be hidden. "I did it," she whispers, her words slicing through the courtroom with a rawness that no accusation could match. The crowd gasps, the siblings freeze, and the mother stiffens, her pride colliding with the undeniable reality of confession. The daughter's breath stumbles, her chest tightens, but she continues, each syllable trembling yet resolute. "I took the loan. I signed the name. I thought I had no choice." The words hang heavy, damning yet human, a revelation that transforms silence into something unbearable. The judge leans forward, his gaze colder than judgment yet warmer than pity, his silence deliberate, his presence commanding. What happens when confession itself becomes the final weapon, cutting deeper than any accusation? The mother's chest rises sharply, her lips parting, her fury reigniting, but her voice falters under the weight of truth spoken aloud. Her eyes narrow, her jaw tightens, and for a moment she seems ready to unleash another storm. Yet something shifts, her gaze flickers, her pride trembles, her fury stalls. The daughter's words have pierced not just the courtroom but the armor of pride she has carried for years. The siblings avert their eyes, their rivalry fractured, their accusations hollow, their silence now louder than their testimony. The crowd murmurs, unsettled, sensing that the trial has reached its end, that the storm has finally broken. What if the greatest punishment is not condemnation but the unbearable demand to forgive when truth is confessed? The daughter's hands clutch the table, her knuckles white, her silence shattered, her voice fragile but alive. "I didn't mean to betray you," she whispers, her words trembling, her eyes brimming with tears. "I was trying to survive." Her confession is not an excuse but a plea, a desperate attempt to reclaim dignity in a room drowning in judgment. The mother's breath catches, her pride collapsing, her fury stalled, her voice trapped in the space between defiance and surrender. Her eyes soften for the briefest moment, a flicker of something buried, love, regret, or perhaps recognition, but it vanishes as quickly as it appears, swallowed by silence. The judge's gaze sharpens, his silence heavier than any decree, his presence commanding, his words withheld. What happens when forgiveness hovers on the edge, visible yet unreachable? The crowd shifts again, divided, unsettled, sensing that the trial has ended not with punishment but with revelation. Some avert their eyes, unwilling to witness the cruelty of reconciliation, while others lean closer, drawn to the rawness of transformation. The daughter's gaze flickers upward, a flash of defiance breaking through the fear, her eyes meeting her mother's with a silent challenge. "You know why I did it." It is fleeting, fragile, but it is there, a spark of resistance in the midst of collapse. The mother sees it, her jaw tightening, her pride trembling, her voice silenced, her fury stalled. The siblings remain frozen, their accusations hollow, their silence heavy. The judge leans back, his presence filling the room, his silence deliberate, his verdict already spoken in the demand for forgiveness. What if the true ending is not resolution but the unbearable weight of ambiguity? The paper lies between them, no longer just ink but confession, no longer just accusation but revelation. The daughter sits frozen, her body trembling, her mind racing, her silence broken, her voice fragile but alive. The mother's breath catches, her pride fractured, her fury silenced, her voice trapped in the space between defiance and surrender. The siblings shift, restless, their rivalry broken, their accusations hollow. The crowd waits, breathless, knowing that the trial has ended not with condemnation but with confession. The judge's silence lingers, heavier than any decree, demanding forgiveness as the only path forward. If you were there, watching the daughter's voice break the silence and the mother's pride falter, would you see the moment as redemption, or as the beginning of a wound that will never heal?